Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, we have Rowby Goren, a Emmy Award-winning TV comedy writer whose career spans decades. If you were a kid in the 90s, then chances are good you've seen Rowby's work, as he has worked on Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tiny Toon Adventures, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the original Ghostbusters, the Bernstein Bears, Super Mario Brothers, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, and Beast Wars. You can find his musings at robyville.com. But outside of writing, he has found success in the business of e-commerce, as well as an advocate for CBD oils, and his website, www.yourcbddaddy.com. All right, and we are live. Rowby, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, it's funny. I do with these calls every now and then. People want to know, they were big fans of what I did decades ago in some cases. I started writing a half a century ago on Ronan Martin's Laugh-In when I was just 20 years old. I sent, I didn't know you weren't supposed to do that, right to the producer, and it actually got to him. And within that week, I went from working at the county courthouse typing legal documents to writing a comedy on the biggest show of its kind. But more people remember me from my cartoon days. I don't know whether you ever even heard of Laugh-In.
Yeah, no, Laugh-In is before my time. The earliest thing that I knew that you were writing for was either probably Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, or
Yes.
or Three's Company. Because man, I love Three's Company. When I was a kid.
Yeah.
My grandma used to always have those reruns blasting.
Well, I wrote one Three's Company and a ton of cartoons and 13 Fat Alberts. I wrote the very last Fat Albert cartoon, in fact.
Really? So how did you get involved with cartoons primarily? Fat Albert was your first cartoon, right?
Well, there was one ahead before that, but that was during a Writers Guild strike, and we were allowed to write, because for the cartoons. But I don't count that cartoon because I really didn't know what I was doing, so I don't count that. So I get a call from my agent saying, this is crazy, but are you interested in writing cartoons? I says, gee, I really don't know how to do it. I did one and I'm sure I totally messed it up. It was actually called the Harlem Globetrotters Superstar Hour. That was the real first one. But that confuses the conversation if I bring that up. It's easier just to say Fat Albert was the first. So I get a call from my agent. I said, first of all, I can't write cartoons, and second of all, I can't write that dialogue that they use on that show. It's the style of talking, the so-called, black dialect, which it really wasn't. It was sort of Bill Cosby's version of black dialect, I guess. I can't do it. But I said, well, at least meet with them. So I met with Arthur Nadell, who was in charge of the writers at Filmation. And he talked me into writing an episode and liked it, much to my surprise. So I kept writing. They put me on staff, so I kept writing them. Arthur Nadell had a habit of hiring people that always they didn't always work out. Like he'd be at some party and some guy would say, "Gee, I'd like to write cartoons." Okay, I'll give you a assignment and you write it. In my case, it worked out, and I ended up writing 13 of those. And by the time I finished, I knew how to write Fat Alberts, but that was the end of the Fat Albert cartoon series. And I wrote the very last one, which was actually a pilot for a different type of Fat Albert that Bill Cosby wanted to try out. It was going to be about tall tales. And I wrote, the last one was about Paul Bunyan. And so that was the last Fat Albert. And then on the walls of Filmation, there was this cartoon drawings of this muscle man called He-Man. I had no idea what that. If I knew nothing about Fat Albert, I knew nothing about that. I mean, I didn't know what it was. I didn't wasn't so we were finished with writing Fat Albert, and I said to Arthur, "Well, thank you very much. Goodbye." No,
Yeah.
we want you to stay. I said, "For to do what?" He said, He-Man. I said, I know nothing about that show. It was already on, I think. He says, come on, we want you to write maybe, sort of, maybe some episodes with a little bit of humor in them, because we don't have any. So I said, oh, well, all right. So he handed me this huge Bible. I think it was like 500 pages long, literally. So we'll read that. And here's some of the scripts from before. And I said, oh my God, this is. So I came up with some ideas, and I ran it by Arthur, and I started writing He-Man, having no idea who these characters were. I didn't know who He-Man was. I just figured, well, okay, He-Man will be Fat Albert but white,
Mm-hmm.
and Mushmouth would be. I just sort of assigned everybody Fat Albert characters just to
Right,
get me
right,
by the
right,
first
right.
script, because with some premises and then writing it, I really didn't know what. And these names, Man at Arms and Manny Faces, and none of it made sense to me. So I wrote about 3 episodes, and one of them was supposed to be a good one, but people that are fans of He-Man, and one was considered by many the absolute worst and a heresy. In fact, it was an episode called "The Greatest Show on Eternia," and Arthur wanted me to write a circus show, so I did. And the first there was a problem with this concept was from storyboard. It said, "Oh, we can't do a circus with He-Man." But with Filmation, once you are assigned to write a script, or once you get paid to write a script, that script gets shot because they don't have time to switch to something different, and they've paid you, and we're going to shoot it somehow. So they grumbled, and we shot The Greatest Show on Eternia, and um, so 20 years later, I'm on the internet, and I for some reason I Google He-Man, where these people are talking about how terrible my episode was, and I went into the forum and says, now look here. I was forced to write these episodes. I didn't want to write them, but I did my best, and it's kind of funny. 20 years, we wrote them, and we never thought that they would be of any interest beyond the initial run, the writers anyway,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden people are talking about the work we did. I did it because I was told to write about a circus. In fact, my initial premise for The Greatest Show on Eternia was a very dark story. It was about a ringmaster that comes to Eternia, and people go into his circus tent and they disappear. And Arthur Nadell is, stopping on that very quickly. He says, "No, don't do that. It sounds like you're talking about, the devil of all things." And they were having enough trouble dealing with parents who were claiming He-Man was violent, and it certainly wasn't. When I was Filmation didn't allow violence on their own. When I
Yeah.
was doing the Paul Bunyan script, which was the Fat Albert script, the last Fat Albert was about Paul Bunyan, because Cosby wanted to do a show about a different kind of a show.
Right, right,
But they
like
wouldn't
something
let
more
Paul
based in
Bunyan cut down a
Americana.
tree. I said, excuse me, why do we pick Paul Bunyan of all things that we can? So they didn't even want to have an axe cut it. So we compromised. The tree could already be on the ground, but we couldn't show him cutting it. They were very on their own. Forget the people that claimed He-Man was violent. It wasn't. He-Man was. There was action, but it wasn't violence. So I wrote these 3 He-Mans, and years later, so I go to these He-Man conventions occasionally, and the last one, people were coming up to me saying, that Greatest Show Attorney was wonderful. And the guy that wrote the horrible, scathing review of He-Man, I became good. Of my episode, we became good friends. And another guy who put down my episode, we have a picture we took at the He-Man convention, and he's holding his nose, and I'm crying in the photo. I'll have to send that to you. And
Yeah, that'll be a
it
good
was
one.
all we were good friends. Even though he even said in his review in his big He-Man book that it had funny moments, but the idea of He-Man having Skeletor shot out of a cannon, was just heresy.
Well, I mean, the thing
So,
that I love about He-Man is that like it does a good job of blending both your fantasy elements and your science fiction elements.
hmm
And really focusing, with that backdrop, it really allows you to focus on the characters, and it looks like you're able to, apply those tricks and those character types that you had learned in sitcom writing to make that show a little bit funnier and more lighthearted.
well, yeah, I did. That was why that was their excuse for keeping me on the show. They said we want some funny episodes. So
Yeah, yeah.
even the one that was the craziest one, but the other ones had always had humor in it. All the other writers, were very serious about He-Man. Larry DiTilio was a big He-Man writer, and I mean, you would think he was. We'd be all we in those days. We worked at an office. We didn't go. There was internet, but not really. So we would all go in every day, and he'd be just, like he was writing Shakespeare, and he was very much into the character. And I was the only one that was, so we would type up. In those days, we actually still had typewriters. We had Selectrics, I guess, and we turned them into the secretaries of Pam and Joyce, or the secretaries. And when I would hand it then they would retype them into the computer. In those days, it was a Radio Shack
Okay.
computer, a TRS, whatever it was. And as they would be typing my scripts, and I would hear them laughing, so I knew I was. I got the effect I wanted. Maybe my scripts they would laugh, and the other ones they just type because they were serious.
Yeah, yeah,
When
yeah.
you're writing comedy, the goal is to get laughter. When you're writing drama, you're sitting there. You don't expect any reaction other than they like it. But my stuff, they would be laughing as they typed it in for the most part.
Oh, that's good.
So that was,
Well,
yeah.
well, let me ask you now. When you were working in the writers' room, was there any specific fantasy or science fiction influences that those other writers wanted to bring into He-Man to kind of, I don't know, give it a little bit more room to stand on? As
Well, we were all in our separate rooms just trying to get our scripts done. We didn't. I didn't really discuss that with them. We were just scrambling. It was like writing pulp fiction. I mean, what I mean is, I I wrote lots of regular television before then,
hmm
but I think and some of it was good, really good stuff. But my best stuff, much to my surprise, was I think my cartoons, and because I wrote so much of them, it was like I didn't really discuss the He-Man. It wasn't until 20 years later when I'm sitting on this He-Man panel at PowerCon, for example. That was one I go to, and they were and people in the audience would be discussing all these subtleties of He-Man that I never even knew about. The guy that wrote this Bible that I told you was like 2 inches thick that they handed to me when I left that Friday. I mean, he had, every level of He-Man. A lot of stuff never made it into the show, but there's all this stuff that I had no idea about. I just
hmm
was writing it because I kind of had to. And when someone pays me, I do as best job as I could.
Yeah, yeah.
But my knowledge of the subtleties and the science fiction, I mean, what I would put in so what came from my live action days, I did write some Croft live action kids shows for Sid and Marty Croft, and and one of them had a volcano in it. So I pretty much whatever show I would work on, whenever I could, if I could get a volcano in it, I would. So He-Man has an episode with a volcano. Fat Albert didn't have one. I wouldn't have fit into that show. But I wrote whenever I would write another show, which I was unqualified to write, because I wrote He-Man. I got a lot of jobs that, quite frankly, serious stuff, because He-Man was such a financial success for Mattel and
hmm
Filmation. So I was all of a sudden in demand for these shows that I never could have written in regular television. I was always a comedy writer. So I was writing a Rambo episode. I get a call from a friend of mine who's suddenly story editing Rambo. And I said, as bad as I was for He-Man, I know nothing about Rambo. I mean, he had to tell me what guns to use, what weapons to use. And if I didn't follow his list of what I can use in each scene, I would sometimes put the wrong weapon. I didn't know one thing from another.
Right.
So I wrote, but going back to He-Man, um, I really wasn't into science. I mean, I like watching, the corny science fiction movies,
Yeah, yeah.
Vincent Price kind of stuff,
Yeah, like
but I
the
was
old
not
Roger
into the
Corman
lore of
movies.
He-Man at all. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't read that. I started to read it, and my eyes glazed over. This guy's Bible was so detailed, and again, things were in the Bible that never made it into the show. But I remember when we'd be at the He-Man conventions, he'd be sitting next to me, and he was read he would start to talk about the very much in detail about He-Man because people in the audience wanted to know, how did it all start and what came first, the toy, the show, and all that stuff. And did we work together? We didn't. Mattel did their thing and we did our thing pretty much. We did have a couple of meetings with Mattel every year. But the point was he was started pontificating on his Bible and he went on forever and ever and ever. And I know it meant something to the people in the audience, but to me, it was like he's talking, a foreign language, possibly talking Latin. All this about He-Man and the characters and the philosophy and the backstory. And it was really funny how little I knew about it when I was writing it. So,
Well, I mean,
so
let
that
me
was
ask you,
yeah.
what do you think it is about He-Man that has caused such a fandom to grow that that people have developed the lore and like it's still, I mean, the show's going on almost what, 30,
Yeah.
40 years,
Well,
and
I
it's
mean,
still going
I'm different.
strong.
Yeah, it's on different levels. At the very last He-Man convention I was at, I was at these tables they set up, and I was at the table with Robbie London. Robbie London was an executive. He was a writer, but he moved up to executive level at Deke Enterprises. When he was at He-Man, when he was at Filmation, he created the Orko character, for example.
Okay.
So we're sitting at this table. By the way, the people when they go to these conventions, they don't care about the writers. They wanted the autographs from the voice director, for the actresses and the
Right,
actors
right, right.
and the artists. The writers are sort of like what do we write? And even my family keeps thinking I sort of like transcribed after the show was shot, and no one understands the writers always came first on He-Man, but at these conventions we're pretty much ignored. But those who do understand the writers' role in He-Man, uh, signing autographs or whatever, talk, and people would come up to us and we look at each other and said, "Oh, here's another one," and there'd be like tears in their eyes. There was one person I believe this conversation I had with this guy. This guy was ready as a kid was ready to kill himself, and he had all sorts of problems. And He-Man, he said, "You saved my life, you with your Orko." And they would come home from school or from an abusive parental relationship, or just plain teenage and kid angst, what kids go through that we don't realize how torturous it can be to be a kid.
Oh yeah.
And they say He-Man was their friend. They knew every day, in Los Angeles, I think it was at 4 or 5 o'clock, they'd come home, and no matter what happened at school or what was going to happen when the father came home and beats them, who knows what, that He-Man was their friend. So above all, He-Man was their friend. And the father came with his two sons to me and says, "Your episode of the greatest show of eternity is their favorite episode." And the kids, and it was the show that was hated by serious He-Man followers, 20 years later, not 40 yet, uh, were of a very high caliber. That is, he was very much into, you know, whereas with me, I had already had my success with live action television. With Larry, he started out in cartoons. This was to him, it was his laughing, I guess. It was his big break, and he made the most of it. And he was very much, it was a perfect match for him. I was very ill suited in theory for He-Man, but it turned out 20 years later, people, those who knew what I wrote, I was a hero to them.
Yeah.
And so He-Man had all kinds of levels of quality to it, even within the very limited budget the show was shot in, and the tight. We had to write basically about a script a week, pretty much. When I would finish writing an episode of He-Man, or Fat Albert. I said, please, I just recovered from the other one. Give me a break. But he really wanted me to keep writing. But Larry, you couldn't stop him from writing. His scripts are usually about 15 minutes too long, and he had to go back and cut stuff out. And Arthur was kind of funny that way. You turn in a script with Arthur, he says, well, why don't you also do this? Why don't you also do that? Then my scripts would start to get too long. So he said, well, we better go and cut. So it's back and forth. I put more stuff in because Arthur wanted more for the second draft. Then we have to take it all back out or something else out. It was amazing how Filmation, the facilities, from the writers to the storyboard artists to the animators to the people doing the ink and paint. We had ink and paint there. It was one of the last studios doing that, and we had some classic animators there. When I would finish writing a script, I'd go upstairs to the storyboard department and yak with them, and then I would go over to the animators. There was one guy that was an animator. He was from Walter Lantz, Woody Woodpecker days. I talked to him. Finally, Arthur would find me on the second floor. He said, "You're bothering them. Get back down here. Get down to your next script." He was very funny about that. If you leave we actually had to fill out time cards. I never, as a writer or any job I ever had to fill out a time card, and I had to fill time cards out. If you left 5 minutes early, he explained to us, if everybody left 5 minutes early, that's stealing. They're paying you, 5 minutes. So I can't tell you how many times Arthur Nadell will be crossing the street, actually going to the bar. He was doing his little, I don't want to say cheating, but he basically said we were cheating the owners. So he would do a little bit of that, but he'd catch me walking across the crosswalk 5 minutes early. He was very much, he even filled out a time card. Even Arthur, who was in charge of, and the reason why is, while Filmation was not a union house, it was I shouldn't say that, it was union house, not for the writers, but for the voice actors and ink and paint. So there we were filling out time cards. Even Arthur Nadell, when he was directing, he used to be a director in his earlier days, when he would direct Bill Cosby for the sequences between the cartoons, he filled out a time card and said, "Director." I mean, I don't think any director in Hollywood ever filled out a time card, and he did. So we all filled out time cards in those days. And it was odd for me who was treated in my live action writing days as a lord. I mean, when I was writing on staff shows, we'd have people bringing in food for us to eat if we worked at the office, so we wouldn't be leaving, and we were treated. And here I was filling out time cards. So it was an interesting change in my being a writer. That was all the secretaries would. They wanted to be with me, let's just say, whereas on Filmation, we were all just working like dogs on that show. Whether you were a writer, whether you were the gopher, whether you were the secretary, it was a hard-working crew. And at the time, it was like, oh God, I can't take it anymore. But years later, when we would have Filmation reunions, it was quite a family at Filmation. We all missed that those early days when we were all young and starting out, or in some cases at the end of their career, like if you were a Walter Lantz artist, So it was a place for everybody there. It was an interesting family at Filmation, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, and also, I mean, working under such pressure, it sounds like you guys
Yeah,
built a camaraderie that allowed you to push out such a quality product that even
it's amazing.
and
I mean,
yeah,
and
go ahead.
they had to get these shows finished on budget, on the right time, and it was amazing that it was like 50 episodes, or I think that's what it was when we were doing 5 days a week or something.
Yeah.
It was amazing what was accomplished.
Well, I think that's what makes animation so important is that as you were able to touch just that one kid's life who was maybe a little depressed, we forget that kids, when they're at that formative age, how important the media they
Mm-hmm.
take in and the lessons that we try and teach through that types of media. Because you look at cartoons nowadays, and I mean, they all the humor just seems so random and just kind of out there that really doesn't have a core message that kind of reaches out through the episodes.
Well, and all that is interesting too. Um, the morals of the show, the end of Fat Albert, the end of He-Man, these messages that He-Man would talk about. Often, at least in my scripts, I had no idea there was no message. So I'd sit down with Arthur about a half an hour. So we much of it was after the fact, the message, but still overall, Filmation really believed in these. They had a we had an educational advisor, and at the time, it seemed like a pain to have to put a message into anything I ever did. I was looking at a Fatty Arbuckle cartoon last night from 19 20 19. It
Yeah.
was 104 years ago. It was shot,
Okay.
and all it was comedy. It was absolutely hysterical. And that's really all I was interested in. I was not interested in messages. I was quite opposed to messages. However, Filmation prevailed uh, in its own way, and amongst all this, He-Man stuff,
Hmm.
uh, uh, Lou Scheimer and Arthur Nadell and the other key people there. So even my circus episode, there was something in there that attracted the father and his two sons who came to meet this guy. And he said that's one of the reasons why they flew. They were from some other country, and that was one reason they were happy to see that the person who wrote that particular episode was seated there and they could talk to us.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So it wasn't my intention, but there I was writing something that was helpful to a child that was never any thought of my mind that it was going to help a child to get through the day or get through the difficulties that all children have to go through because they don't understand this screwy real world that we're in.
Now, so you were writing for He-Man, then you said you went directly into writing for Rambo. How many episodes did you write of Rambo?
Third episode, I get a call from a story editor of the Berenstain Bears, and they're having lots of problems getting for CBS Saturday morning version, and they were having lots of problems with the Berenstains were unhappy with the scripts, so unhappy they wanted to pull the show.
Okay.
And he says, "Yes, I don't know how I knew this guy, but somehow I must have known him." And he says, "Can you try writing a Berenstain Bears script?" I said, "Well, that's more my line."
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Yeah, well,
wrote,
that's like a family
I wrote,
sitcom almost.
yeah, exactly. And Stan Berenstain was a very interesting guy, and I'll tell you a little about that.
Yeah.
So I write one, so they give me a script that was called the Missing Pumpkin, I think it was. It was based on his book. And most writers, when you get a script and you're basing it on a book that already exists, they want to change things. They want to make things different. They want to make it their own. Well, I took his book, the Berenstain Bears Missing Pumpkin, and I didn't change it. I get a call from them. The Bernsteins were just thrilled with that script, and I saved it CBS from losing the show, and they asked me to be the story editor.
Hmm.
But the Bernsteins liked it so much they lived in Pennsylvania and on a farm. That's where they worked out of.
Okay.
They flew to the West Coast just to meet me, and I didn't realize that I was the reason why they flew there. I just knew they wanted. I was going to meet them because I was going to be the story editor. But they just were so happy that I was able to take their books and not make something different than what it was. But Stan was very much loved all those old. So we got to work on the show. We did things back. We didn't have a modem in those days. We had a fax machine, and apparently the fax machine on the Berenstain era was some kind of there was some kind of a chemical that was used to make the fax work,
Hmm.
and it was the smelliest machine you can imagine. And Jan was always complaining about that smelly fax machine. So that's how we would send the scripts back and forth. But he was into old-fashioned movies. He was into the 40s and 50s MGM kind of movies, and so he was very much more than just writing for the Bears. He was, like you say, writing for this family. And whenever he could, we would talk about the old, the MGM days, the old-fashioned comedy, and we put it in wherever we could. So we got along really well on that show. There was a secretary that was working at CBS for the person in charge of children's shows then, Judy Price. Her
Mm-hmm.
name's Linda Wolverton, and she came knocking on my door and said, I really would like to write cartoons. I always wanted to be a writer. She was a secretary for Judy Price. I said, well, go ahead, write one, and I told Stan that Judy's secretary would like to write. So he said, okay, let her do it. And she wrote a really good script, and she wrote a lot more for Berenstain Bears, and we used her on another show for CBS, Teen
Yeah.
Wolf, based on that movie. Well, Linda went much further than those cartoons. She ended up writing Lion King for Disney.
Oh wow.
That was a good jumping point for Linda Wolverton. So all these things happen, it's a cartoon, but exciting things have happened because of that. And there was another writer who wrote Bullwinkle cartoons in his early days. And as he got older, he started writing, big TV shows, All in the Family and things like that. And then finally, he couldn't get work anymore. And I knew the guy because he helped me get my start when I was a kid. And I got him to writing cartoons. He wrote tons of Smurfs and everything else. So I was able to return the favor of him helping me when I was starting out. So when he was much older, and so all of a sudden he could not get work. So he was writing all these CBS big hit shows, All in the Family. And then one year he couldn't get anywhere. He would go there. He'd be working the hallways. They were so busy. He couldn't get any more work because the change of approvals to a younger group of people that didn't know of him. So I got him back into cartoons. It was kind of ironic for him, as it was to me, because I still was writing all these so-called live-action shows and cartoons, but he really needed the money, quite frankly. So I was happy to help him out,
Yeah.
and he did a really great job with his cartoons.
Now.
Tons of Smurfs. The very first cartoon was for Hanna-Barbera. It was, which I don't talk about, which was one episode of Harlem Globetrotter Superstar Hour. And actually, I saw it somewhere at the 99-cent store. So it existed for a while. And the guy who was the story editor of that show became the head of Deke Entertainment, which was a huge animation studio in its day, from Inspector Gadget to just tons of shows.
Yeah.
So I didn't write any, but I wrote that cartoon, and then a live action film which never got off beyond script stage for Hanna-Barbera. But I guess the way I did, because Southern Star, which was Teen Wolf and Berenstain Bears, was an Australian, for some reason, version of Hanna-Barbera.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I don't know why Australian. It was on Melrose Avenue, but it had something to do with the deal. So it was an official Australian company, but we were on Melrose. I don't know, which was an odd place to be, because it's nowhere near. Melrose is, in Hollywood, couple of miles west of Hollywood on Melrose Avenue. But but nothing really at Hanna-Barbera. I'm too busy working for the other studios.
Yeah.
Busy,
Yeah.
busy.
So.
I wrote
So
comedy
how
and live
many?
action shows. They had no business. Hmm?
So how many episodes of the Bernstein Bears did you write in
Well,
total?
we were on for about 2 or 3 years, and there were about, I guess, 15 episodes each. I was the
Okay.
story editor, so I didn't write them all like Linda did, and George Atkins wrote some,
Mm-hmm.
and a few other people. But that was that. Then Teen Wolf came about. I get a call from Southern Star, said we're almost ready to sell Teen Wolf, and CBS is hating the scripts we've been turning in, and we have like a week to get that get Judy Price to approve a script that she liked.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, I had 5 days to write that Teen Wolf script without any knowledge of what Teen Wolf was about. So there's all these adventures and dramas going on in the world of cartoons. Big business. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So just to just kind of backtrack and talk about the Bernstein Bears, there's definitely
hmm
something I wanted to ask you. Now, a few years ago, were you aware that there was a really big conspiracy theory going on about the Bernstein Bears and the Mandela effect?
No, tell me about it.
All right, all right. So this is something I definitely wanted to touch a base with you on because it went viral online. So many people were talking about it. So basically, the conspiracy theory is that there's a large group of people who remember two different names for it. There's the Bernstein Bears, but then it's the
Yeah,
Bernstein Bears, right?
yeah,
So there's
yeah. Their
actually
name was Berenstain. That was their name.
right.
Stan and Jan Berenstain.
Right. So there's actually a group of people so convinced that it was actually the Bernstein Bears that they have developed a conspiracy theory where people from an alternate dimension are coming into our
Mhm.
reality because they're remembering a different past. It is wonky and out there, but man, I wanted to get your
Yeah, oh,
take
that's
on that.
funny. I think Stan would have loved that to have heard that theory. His son is now running the Berenstain Bears franchise, I guess, but he would have, I'm sure, got a big kick out of that. This is a very. I mean, alternate reality is another. I can't get. I wouldn't know. Maybe
Yeah,
there is
yeah,
one,
yeah.
but it came from. They were writing magazine cartoons. They were doing magazine cartoons, and when they started out, and they started. Apparently, there were some bears that lived in the area behind where they lived, the bears, and they started writing about these bears. And of course, Berenstain kind of was interesting, but
Right, right.
And then they met with Dr. Seuss was running Random House, and became this huge, successful, uh, somewhat controversial series about bears. Many librarians would not put the books in their library. They felt the books were a bit, not too heavyweight. But it
Really?
didn't bother Stan. I mean, they made a fortune off of that
I
series.
wonder why that is because I remember, I mean, the one thing I do remember about the Bernstein Bears vividly is all the books in my elementary school library, as well as the VHS tapes, which had probably like what couple of episodes from the TV show on as well. I
Yeah.
mean, what do you think made him
Well,
so
I mean,
controversial
some
for the time?
bears. I mean, if they had so much money to spend on books, I guess they didn't think they were of much substance.
Okay.
I guess, but there was some issues with some public libraries, but they were very popular, and I guess they still are now. Although the Sun uh, has sort of an offshoot of the original books, and it's Christian based, which I thought was rather interesting. Uh, the stories get into apparently not heavy handed, but definitely a Christian uh, slant.
Right.
And of course, Stan and Jan were Jewish, and of course, so was the son. So I guess he was born again. And he says in some articles that Stan and Jan, approve of these other. Let's talk about a second reality, because the other books, I assume, still take the traditional Berenstain approach, but they have another line that skews into. Touches into the religious aspect, which is probably infuriates librarians even more, which I found very. So the interesting thing about the fact that the Berenstain Bears have an offshoot series of books that have a Christian theme to it. I hope I'm doing it justice. I'm sure it's not quite as what I'm saying. But I remember when his son started taking over joining in on the process of the Berenstain Bears books, I said to Stan, "Well, I imagine one day you'll be looking down and you'll be so proud of your son." He says, "What are you talking about? Looking down?" I said, "Well, you know what I mean, figuratively speaking."
Right, right.
He said, "Well, when it's over, it's over." So I found it interesting that he did give his blessings, according to his son's article or something, into this before he and Jan died. Their son was born again, but for whatever reason, there's this offshoot. But we're getting away from the cartoons.
Right, right.
But I wish the Berenstains well. That's for sure. That franchise was very good to me. Fond
Yeah.
memories.
Well, and just kind of going back to what we were saying, the one thing I think that gives the Bernstein Bears the lasting power is that each one of those books or episodes had some moral story to it, whether it was not eating
Yes,
too
oh
much
yes,
candy.
and Jan and Stan again. He had this. Well, the books may have been whatever. I mean, I enjoyed them when I was rewriting them for the cartoons. I would do original stories and some based on the books. They were fun, and again, Stan was such a fan of old traditional comedy. It was fun to work with him on a level that didn't always get into the scripts, but
Yeah.
the things that he was interested in. And he also wanted to do a movie. We were talking about a movie that had nothing to do with the Berenstain Bears, and we were, he was hoping to get it sold. I forgot what the subject matter was. So Stan, while Berenstain Bears was certainly his bread and butter, and he was a hard businessman. He really, demanded his due of the money from Random House and all that. He had other thoughts about doing, like, I don't know, it was some musical film with a very much old fashioned kind of approach. So there was that interesting thing that came right after He-Man, of all things. Then I
Yeah.
wrote all kinds of stuff. Again, sometimes doing He-Man kind of shows, like Rambo, and then doing a lot of funny shows.
Yeah.
So I had all kinds of stuff I wrote
Well,
during my cartoon days.
so I guess then the major franchise that you would have moved to next after that would have been Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right?
So yeah, so because I mean, I was just constantly working in those days for one script after another for different companies. So I get a call from Jack Mendelson, who was I don't know what his title was. I guess he was a story editor or whatever. He says he has this. He's working on this show called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I said, "What?" As Man at War was enough for me. Now, was he joking? I mean, I didn't know the history of that show. It came from a comic book that its success was amazing. If you know, I'm sure you do. It came from two guys that just did this thing. As a crazy joke or something, and it became an enormous. My God! So I get a call from Jack saying, come up with some ideas. I got a ton of episodes I got to have written. I said, okay, I guess they gave me a Bible, and I submitted one premise after another, and which I thought was wonderful. And he said, no, 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 this is not what the show's about. So I got two. I forgot how many I wrote, two or three, and I finally was able to do write the way he wanted to. But for whatever reason, I only wrote, I think, just two, maybe three. One was the giant, the 50-foot Irma,
Mm-hmm.
and one was the one about a collector who had a Ninja Turtle museum, and he had all. I mean, that one he had to buy for me. I mean, whether he hated everything else that I did, but the concept was this guy had a museum with all kinds of Ninja Turtle memorabilia, and the only thing he was missing was the Ninja Turtles themselves. Now that one, if he hated everything else about me or my premises, he had to buy that. So I was able to get one through him. So I got these two scripts. I may have done three, but I think it was two. And again, it's so funny because those two shows, they're making Ninja Turtle movies, and He-Man keeps resurrecting itself. I think it's gonna be another movie or something. At least
Yeah,
in the
yeah, they got a
works.
new they got a new Netflix series coming out, another animated special, which will be cool.
It's animated. Okay, so there's all kinds of stuff going on with He-Man, and a huge fan base still. If you've ever been to a He-Man, so it's kind of funny that I just lucked out on getting the two popular ones, and of course, Fat Albert, sort of in a way because of Bill Cosby's issues, uh, sort of survives. The other stuff I wrote is pretty much forgotten unless someone's a fan of the
Yeah.
Harlem Globetrotter Superstar Hour. So I wrote all kinds of stuff for
Well,
the
I mean,
cartoon world, and
well, you've had a chance to play in the sandbox of trademark characters and intellectual property. I mean, you've done Super
yeah, that's
Mario
how it
Brothers,
was.
Sonic. Now,
Mhm.
now, what was it like adapting video game characters to writing scripts when you were working on like Mario and Sonic? Did you take the same approach where you just tried to envision it as like a as a sitcom with just dialogue interactions?
Well, I mean, in some ways I had to because I didn't always have any. I mean, unless I was going to sit down and watch, 4 episodes, I didn't know anything about Sonic the Hedgehog or or Mario Brothers, other than I played the game.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas the people that sold the show to the network or to the toy company or to the licensing company, they I'm sure they had higher aspirations. I did the best I could with the little time I had to work on it. Because usually I did one ups or one or two ups. I'm trying to remember. I mean, I mean, when you write the He-Mans, I only wrote again. Fat Albert. We would when we were the episodes of Fat Albert. We had I think a 5-day a week strip at that point on Fat Albert. So that was quite a few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so when you're writing just a few episodes, it's hard to get into the character. I was there for 13 episodes, and if there was going to be another season, I would have stayed. But I got out of it by getting into Berenstain Bears. So I just did the best I could with these characters. And if there was a way to put a volcano in an episode, I would do that. Larry used to always joke. He says, "Now, okay, he was working on a version of Transformers. It was a
Oh, the Beast
CGI
Wars.
version of Transformers out
Yeah,
of
yeah, I loved that as a kid. I was a big Beast Wars fan because it was always,
Beast Wars. Yes.
yeah, it was always
So,
right on TV when I got home from school. So I watched that show religiously.
Larry was the story editor of that show, and it was really something new in those days.
Oh
This
yeah, the
computer
CGI.
animation, even though it was a bit limited. Looking back at it now, if you look at them, but he said, "Now just make sure you don't put any volcanoes in any of my scripts." But I think I may have. So the so that was an interesting series. It was out of Canada. I think it was Vancouver where they had their big computer stuff there, and it was very limited. So I mean, I figured, well, there was a character they had. Was it Dingobot or Ding? What's it? So I said, well, we can only do so many characters in the script because it was just too expensive to have too many extra characters or whatever. So I did the one about the double Dinobot. I think it's called. That was his name, Dinobot.
Yeah, I think it was.
So they could use the same character as two. So I wrote about I don't know how many episodes of that I wrote, and I remember again years later, when the host, 20 years later, when people are talking about Transformers, and Rowby Goren, he stole stuff from earlier scripts. Well, they didn't understand that I, I did my lines. My script was written before the other was. It just the order was changed.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they said, and on top of that, he worst episodes or whatever they said. But the big point was that I stole lines from other earlier episodes when actually it was the reverse. I don't know who it was or what happened, but I had some lines that were borrowed from a later writer, and they said I stole from the early writer. So, uh, but the thing was, my overall attitude about writing cartoons, as opposed to my live action days, which would be shows like Three's Company, Laugh-In, and a ton of other shows, Hollywood Squares, well, Hollywood Squares is actually not a part of this. Those were union shows where when shows would be rerun, you would get residuals.
Mm-hmm.
In the world of animation, animation was run as far as the unions issue would go, the same way it was in the olden days when it wasn't the writers, it was the artists who created the stories. Story would be an idea, a visual idea, and then you do a storyboard. And then there may not have ever been a script of some of these early Disney cartoons or whatever. But when it came to television, the scripts always came first. So at one point, the writers were getting so fed up about all this we would spend weeks on a script or a week or whatever, and the actors would come in and record it, and they would get the residuals, and we didn't get any residuals. We finally were able to get the National Labor Relations Board to authorize a vote, and we voted to have to be unionized, and we went through all of the steps. We actually were unionized, and then the big studios, Disney's, Deke, all the big studios. Uh, this was when Reagan
Mm-hmm.
was president. Went to the national NLRB and said, you know, this is. They convinced them that cartoons were still being written the old way. That the storyboard, the writing was not the way the cartoons were done, and the National Labor Relations Board reversed the Los Angeles hearing, which was all going to happen. We were all so excited.
Yeah, yeah.
Finally, we were going to get some residuals, and Reagan's NLRB, who for whatever reason, of course, he was the one that his presidency. Um, uh, Shut down the air traffic controllers who just
Yeah.
wanted to have some time off.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so
He
he
ended up
fired
breaking
them
the
all.
union
So he was
system
not
in
a
this
friend of
country.
labor or Reagan. And I'm no fan of Reagan. You can quote me for many reasons. That his ignorance, his refusal to discuss AIDS during his presidency till the very end,
Well,
even
and
though he came from a industry that had gays all over the
oh
place,
yeah, yeah.
and he until I think until Rock Hudson died, he finally, the word AIDS came out of his mouth. So I'm not a fan of Reagan, but the initial unfan, he was not a labor friendly president,
Well, I mean, and
and
you know what I dislike most is the myth of Reagan. Like they've tried to make him out to
yeah,
be such a great president, but when you look at his policies and what he enacted, a lot of
no,
the problems that we're experiencing today, politically and economically, are his doing. The low
yes,
tax cuts,
yes, it is.
the slam back
One
on
of the
Wager.
things,
I mean, that's when
yeah.
wages froze. Was what 88?
Well, not just that. He instituted taking mentally ill people out of the hospitals
Yeah.
and putting them on the street. He claimed a good reason for it, but I'm sure it was dollars and cents. And here's the homeless, the mentally disturbed homeless that we still have, thanks to Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, and I'm no fan of his at all. Although, interestingly, I did vote for him for governor because I thought it would be just great to have a movie star as governor. So I actually voted for him the first time
Man, and
for
that
when he was
was
governor of California.
and it's like it's strange to look back at his films when what was the one he did with the monkey breakfast for bongos or boko.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
He
like
wasn't he he wasn't much of an actor. And then and then during World War II, he didn't serve as a soldier officially. He had some other function which did not put him in the line of fire.
right, right, but he liked
So I
to
mean,
play up that role in front of the cameras for sure.
yeah, look, he was hugely successful and all of that, but he was not a great president. I was not, especially in the area of unionism, and his NLRB reversed the Los Angeles NLRB. Studio said it was done where the scripts are not as important as the animation part. So to this day, I only get residuals from France because France insists on rewarding the author, and there's no contract can take away the creative input of the writer in France. Of all things, the Writers Guild that would send me tiny little checks every now, and if it's for a cartoon, I know it's from France. Kind of funny.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
So,
I mean,
but
if
all that's so we would. So let's go back to He-Man again.
yeah, yeah,
So we be sweating out these scripts, and then the cast of He-Man would come in, and they would, they were after a SAG, and they would come in, spend maybe a half an hour or an hour. They were great people. I know who the actors were, and all of that, but the idea that they should come in and just read our lines and get all the residual, we got nothing. But that's okay. I still enjoy the years I was writing cartoons because I really wrote some of my best material there because it was like writing pulp,
Yeah.
one after another, whether I knew the style of the show or not. If they said Rambo, yeah, I can do that. I mean, no, I didn't. I said I can't do it. Says, come on, do it. I want you to write the show. So I said, okay.
And like, what a strange property to turn into a kids' TV show too, because the first two Rambo movies were incredibly violent and dark. I mean, it was about a
Yeah.
Vietnam soldier's personal struggle.
Well, the networks and the syndicators, they just wanted to make money, and they figured, well, we'll just tone it down and make it for kids. However, I was invited by Larry DiTillio, again of all people. He was teaching animation at UCLA, and he invited me. He would invite me every now and then to be a guest during his UCLA course. So
Mhm.
I went in there and we showed a Rambo episode, and to the people as an example of my work. And afterwards, a very nice woman came up to me and she said, thank you very much. I want to ask you something. You made the villains Arab, and why do they have to be Arab? And I said, well, we didn't have any Germans, it was World War II. I mean, whatever I said to her, and I realized, she was very nice about it, but she said, we're not at war with you. I mean, why did you pick Arabs? Blah, blah, probably because I was told to use Arabs again.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
point is, you don't know. And then I realized, I said, I really apologize to you. I'm happy you brought that up. I didn't realize my little stupid cartoon for Rambo that had these Arab stereotypes. Forgive me. I mean, I'm sure that the drawings were probably very stereotyped. Were was a very negative thing to do. So uh, I was made more aware of humanity, and she wasn't um, um, mean. She was very nice about explaining this to me.
Yeah, yeah.
So it made me more aware to be uh, that what I write does have an effect on people. A stupid Rambo cartoon, because of that overlay of this Arabs being the villain. There was no need for them to be Arab because they were a good easy target,
Yeah.
but it was not. I regretted that episode of that I ever wrote that episode. But I'm happy I wrote it because I learned a lesson from it. So I guess I can look at it two ways.
Well, and we also forget that the period in which art is created, this instance being writing, is influenced on the times that we're living. So if it was World War II, of course it
Certainly,
would be the
like
Germans.
Amos and Andy,
Yeah.
and the poor Kate Smith was vilified for singing a song about darkies, but she meant it in the most loving way. I met Kate Smith, so yes, it's all true, but still, I mean, it was different if what I wrote was of an artistic nature. It was different if it was a Warner Brothers cartoon, like Son of the South is a problem. I just love that movie, but it's particularly Zippity Doo Dah. But obviously, I'm not black, and some people were really offended by it, even in its time. And I just read that Disney is not going to release that to Disney. Is it called Disney Plus?
Yeah.
Even with a disclaimer.
I
They
mean,
decided it's never going to be seen again,
I
as far as
will.
unless it's bootlegged.
I mean, I have like a strong connection to that movie because that was the movie my grandpa took my grandma to on their first date. So
Really?
I've always been a big fan of Song of the South, and particularly Zippity Doo Dah. I would really like to see Disney remake it in a tasteful way that kind of honors the history, honors the
It was I guess you might say it was I hate to say it in this way, it was probably racism done in the most beautiful Disney way possible.
Right,
So
right.
I admire the animation in it. I doesn't bother me the dialect, the style, but I guess it just ran shivers down just another insult to a black person who says, "Here they do it again." Now Disney's doing it. Amos and Andy, I'll defend to my dying day. I think the television show particularly
Mm-hmm.
was so sad that done. I thought it was much better than the Jeffersons, if you want to talk about quality of comedy. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, in those days, there were very few positive. But I always thought Amos and Andy was positive. They had some, the judges were black, the business people were black. Then they had the buffoons who were the stars of the show. Uh, Not Amos. There were issues, but again, I didn't have to live my life as a black person, so if they really found a problem with Song of the South. And then, as you know, Bob Clampett has his problems with some of his films,
Mm-hmm.
but not meaning to be um, um, doing. He just wanted to do funny stuff, and there's a couple of his films that are uh, uh, racist, considered racist. And Warner Brothers did re-release those with a disclaimer, I guess. And but some of it is probably still tough to watch for if you're black, unless you appreciate his wonderful comedy. And anyway, so in those days, of course, what I wrote was pretty much compared to what, like you say now, was rather almost like Ozzie and Harriet
Mm-hmm.
style. It was we couldn't do a lot of stuff at CBS or NBC and all that, and it wasn't until Fox had their lineup where things started to get edgy, and um, and then of course all kinds of interesting cartoons came out beyond the more sanitized cartoons that I wrote.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting the way animation has shifted because when animation first started out, like a lot of those old Warner Brothers, Betty Boop cartoons, like they were made for adults. And
Yes, yes,
after what was it, the 50s when they passed all the guidelines and it kind of geared
yes.
cartoons towards kids. Like I mean, cartoons are just kind of returning to its roots in a way because
Yes, yeah, yeah. I don't watch any, but the ones I've seen on the internet, let me put it that way, there's some really interesting stuff there. Now that you can do animation on your cell phone,
oh yeah, yeah.
almost, I guess you can. So it's amazing what uh, artists are coming out with. I think it's wonderful, although I don't see much of it, but I do see things that are. It's exciting if I was starting out as if I was an artist and an animator, and could take advantage of the tools that are available now. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah.
And yes, and they're getting edgier because there's no censorship. We had to deal with not just so much Judy. I remember I was in the office with Judy Price, and we were just ready to sell the show based on another commercial character called the Noid. The Noid
Oh
was
yeah, yeah. Avoid the noise.
what
The was he? He steals your
the,
pizza, right?
the pizza, yeah, full thing to get the franchise licensing rights to a new idea. So the Noid was one of them, and we were just ready to sell the show. I mean, literally, Judy was saying, "Okay, we're going to go for it," and she gets a phone call from the animation woman that was against all these cartoons in those days. What was her name? She spoke in front of the Senate. Oh, what was her name? She got a phone. She said, "Excuse me, this is so and so." I knew she didn't want to take the call, but she had to.
Right, right.
And by the time she got off the phone, it was what was her name? That woman who was the Budinsky of cartoons. But she had some strength, and she says, "I'm sorry, I can't buy the Noid now." After this phone call. She wasn't talking specifically about the Noid. Peggy Charon, that was her name. I think that's all her
Okay,
name
yeah,
was.
yeah.
She was the one who was wanted better than what she was getting, and it's kind of hard to blame her. But I think she was one of the people against He-Man, claiming there was violence, and there wasn't. There was just action adventure. We never could have anybody hurt in our shows. They could be stunned, but never intentionally hurt on our version of He-Man. So Peggy Chern had called Judy. She was literally ready to buy the show. We worked after weeks of back and forth. She said, "No, I hate that idea. I hate this,
Yeah, yeah.
Rowby. That was the worst idea you ever gave me." Over and over and over. If I said, "Okay, it's probably a good idea anyway." I mean, the idea of not doing the Noid was probably better.
Well, I mean, like,
But
I
we had
wonder, like, what her issue could have been, because you're just talking about a cartoon character whose main intention is just to steal pizza. It's like the Hamburglar.
Well, again, she wasn't calling about the Noid. It was just something about, I'm really going to get. It was a general, saying you better shape up, Judy, or whatever. I
Okay.
remember a worse show was the Garbage Pail Kids.
Oh
So I get a call from
yeah.
Judy. We're going to do the Garbage Pail Kids. Oh, great! Finally, talk about something finally being edgy.
Yeah,
So
Garbage Pail Kids was
we
that for the
wrote
era.
13 episodes, and under the direction of, oh my God, actually, oh my God, what's his name? I can't believe. Anyway, so we wrote 13 episodes, and they never saw the light of day until years, decades later. I think they got onto VHS tape, but that they literally they trashed the whole series because I'm sure it was Peggy Cheren saying, this is ridiculous. And what we did with the Garbage Pail, because if you get the tape that's available or CD
Hmm.
on Amazon or eBay, it was we were careful not to make fun of kids. We just had fun with their character. We didn't poke fun of some. I forgot who they were, but with the whole series with 13 episodes were shot and never saw the light of day on CBS. So it was a weird time. And then of course Fox starts announcing they're going to have a Saturday morning show. We said, good luck. We thought we sort of said, our attitude was, they're never going to get anywhere. Well, Fox took over and CBS
Yeah.
died after so many years.
Well, and a lot of that was also, using those same kind of bankable franchises, Spider-Man,
Yes, but being a
Batman.
little bit edgier. I mean, they had the Power Rangers,
Yeah.
and they were a little bit edgier than what we were. But yeah, a lot of it were the same old things. I did Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures. I think that was for Fox because I knew the people. I didn't do much for Fox at all, but that was one of them.
Yeah.
And then I did something about oh yeah, it was the Excellent Adventure Inside a Human Body. I think that was the episode I worked on. Somebody they had to go inside. They shrunk themselves and went inside the body or something. So they were in the liver. We had a lot of fun with the organs in that cartoon. But so cartoons certainly have changed. I would say, in theory, I mean, when you consider everything that's out there, especially the internet stuff, where people really are, in some cases, are very clever.
Oh yeah.
There was one I saw. Oh, did you see the one about Cardboard City? Have you ever seen that one?
No, no. What's it about?
It's CGI about a city made out of cardboard boxes.
Hmm.
Google it. I mean, YouTube it and see it. It is the most wonderful cartoon ever.
Well,
It's
and
called. Let's see if I can find it. It's about a cardboard city,
yeah.
and from the beginning to the end, it is quite amazing.
Well, I think
Uh,
that's one of the things that's amazing about the internet is that it allows you to have an avenue to express yourself without having to go through the traditional gatekeepers that have been there in
exactly.
the past. So you can really get your vision out to the world now.
Yes, absolutely. And you can do it. I mean, it's still a bit of work, but it can be done. Before you had to do, you
Man, and
know.
I mean, as much as I love like the old 2D style animation that was
Hmm.
actually done by hand, like there's just something about CGI animation that just draws you so much more into the story itself because things are so vivid and it's just so much more alluring.
So there's all of this stuff from then, the Bob Clampett stuff, and um, and even some of the real, the old stuff where they had such a small budget of the Aesop's Fables, a farmer alfalfa.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain rhythm to the because they had such tight budgets. The repeats, the cycles of things repeating. There's sort of a based on economy, early Disney repeating of cycles. It's interesting what they're able to do. They stay in the cycle long enough as they can to fill up some frames, but then they know they got to go to something else, and that something else could usually tops the cycle, but the money they saved on the cycle they could put into some interesting things. And sometimes you see these very tightly budgeted films from the 20s and the 30s,
Right.
where the animators put some extra time into it they weren't paid to do, because there's some very creative. They did their best with their
Oh
with
yeah.
their craft.
Well, I mean, and it's really you have to see them in the certain way because earlier today I actually went to the theater with my sister and we watched the original King Kong. They released for like
Oh,
the
really?
the 85th anniversary in theaters, and like.
Wow.
And when you actually get to see it on the big screen, you notice all the things
Yes.
that are happening. Like for instance, when Kong's on screen and like all the little furs moving in like split
Yes.
microseconds, like the way that they were so meticulous in the way they animated those early clay
Yes.
animation. I mean, it's just amazing.
And again, we talk about King Kong now, and it was 85 years later. That what you said, 85.
Yeah, yeah,
They
85.
didn't know that people were going to be watching this stuff. They made these films basically disposable. No one thought you were going to see Singing in the Rain, 70 years later.
Yeah.
They made it. They loved it. They put their hearts and souls into it. Same thing with King Kong. No one could have, whatever they paid him to do that. I wish I remembered his name, but whatever they paid them to do that, it had to be a labor of love, and he wanted to do the best he could, and he did something that survives all these decades later. When I was living in
You mean
on
Ray Harryhausen?
that was his name,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the clay
Uh,
animation animator.
yes, I was when I was living in West Hollywood. There was a place called Lytton Center of the Arts, and they had some of the King Kong stuff there, including a King Kong, that was so old that the rubber was starting to, well, it was pretty much deteriorated, but it
Oh
was the
yeah.
original King. So some of the foam was still on it in some cases. So I was actually able to see it. It's amazing. I also worked with the claymation people, Will Vinton, on you'll see in my the California Raisin special. There were two. I did the second one, so I went down there and saw how they did their animation with clay
Mm-hmm.
in Washington State. I don't think. Oh, no, it was Oregon. That's where his studios were, and they had these studios with all these tiny little sets with different guys, moving the clay around all by hand. It was fascinating, all the work they did to do that. I remember I was also working on a cartoon version of the Raisins, California Raisins, and the animators here in Los Angeles asked me to bring back a couple of, I think maybe one raisin so they could look at it in person, the clay version.
Yeah, yeah.
It was styrofoam with clay on top of the styrofoam. So they gave it to me in a special case, a box. I got on the airplane coming from Oregon to Los Angeles, and they X-rayed the box, and there was a raisin inside of it, a big raisin. This thing was about 8 inches tall, I guess, and they insisted I take it out of the box so they could all, they didn't have selfies in those days, but they all wanted to see the raisin that I had in my box, my wooden box. So I had all these adventures writing cartoons, although at the time most of it was just hard work, because you're mostly I would write comedy, but so it was always a lot of work and no residuals.
Right.
But I wrote a ton of them. I made a lot of money writing cartoons, but then once I never got any residuals except from France.
So let me ask
But
you. So when you were coming up and you were writing for Cosby Kids, did you ever get a chance to work with Bill Cosby on some comedy writing?
I did, but I for some reason I was in his office and I just fell asleep. When I woke up, I was also groggy. Well, yes, Bill Cosby. So I remember. So by the time I was writing Fat Albert, I had written for some of the biggest comedians and performers in history. Many people who I admired, like Eve Arden was a guest on the Alice TV show about the restaurant,
Okay.
and I was in awe of her, and I sat with her in the anyway. So that was Eve Arden. So when I was on Fat Albert, they said, "Well, Bill's coming in. He comes in about 2 or 3 times during the season, and he
Hmm.
shoots his live action sections." I said, "Oh, great!" I really wanted to meet him because I was a big fan of his records. He did his early work.
Right.
He truly was a talented comedian, and so I said, "Oh, I can't wait." And they said, "Excuse me, you're not going to be so excited when you meet him." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "He's the most rude, insulting, unpleasant person you can imagine." I said, "Well, I mean, how bad can he be? I mean, I've worked with prima donnas, uh, but uh, but I always felt that if you're talented enough, that's okay. I mean, if I would have the good luck to work with Barbara Streisand, I understand she's a perfectionist.
Hmm.
I say, you know what? I'm still blessed to be, 6 feet near her. Of course, now with coronavirus, I guess I wouldn't want to be 6 feet anymore. But I said, how bad can he be? He says, you'll
So
see.
pretty bad.
So we go in and we have the Fat Albert sequences, the live action stuff between the cartoons set up there, and he comes in. The most surly, unpleasant person you can imagine, who went out of his way to be insulting and condescending to us who were there just to the production assistants, whatever. Very insulting and unpleasant. I'm not saying he went out and yelled at everybody, but
Right. Right. It was just his
it was
demeanor.
not a pleasant experience. And I worked with shows where people were difficult, but he was someone who really was shockingly unpleasant. But as soon as the camera turned on, he was Mr. Cosby on TV. He was as pleasant as can be. Now I know doing these things is not fun work, and it's a lot of work, even the most simple on-camera sequences.
Hmm.
And I know you put on a happy face, especially Bill would, when the camera turns on. But it was such a stark difference. And from the guy saying, be nice to your friends, to the real Bill Cosby, who was being unnecessarily unpleasant. So years went by, and it always bothered me. Again, I work with all kinds of difficult people. In fact, see, look, the Berenstains. People would call me in to work with difficult people, like the Berenstains. They wanted to pull the show from CBS, and so forth. So I was good at that. I like working with people that were problems.
Right.
'Cause I
Right.
got along
Right.
with everybody. I was of good problems, but Bill was just still bothered me. And finally, I did write, and you can find it somewhere on the. If you Google Rowby Bill Cosby, you'll see what I wrote about Bill Cosby about a year or two before he was charged with these crimes. So you'll see my Bill Cosby. Just Google Rowby
Yeah. Well,
Goren Bill Cosby, and you'll see the article somewhere on the internet.
well, I mean,
I hope it's not.
and it's like, whenever like people go out of their way, to try and be unpleasant. Like if you're a
Well, that's how he
professional,
was.
yeah, if you're a professional, you're there. You don't have to put on a happy face just while the camera's going. You can afford to be pleasant, but people who are like that, who go out of their way to be double faced and try and like keep who they are. I mean, they're bound to be exposed, and that's just
Well,
what
that's
happened
what
with
he really was
Cosby.
exposed. And when I put up that article, I thought, maybe somehow maybe he just had a bad time. Maybe it was a low period in his career, even though he was making plenty of money off of
Hmm.
off of Fat Albert. I thought maybe I was being a little bit too harsh on him. But then I spoke to other writers who had exactly the same experience with him on other shows. So it was sort of like. an enormously talented, as far as comedy goes, person, and so I was not surprised that he was that way with women, and it was karma, that's for sure,
Oh yeah,
that he
yeah.
is
He got what
now
was coming to
languishing
him.
in a prison for probably the rest of his life. But it was such a disappointment because I really was so wanting to meet him, and because I admired him so much, and he was not a nice guy on that show,
Well, I'm sure he
but on
wasn't a
other
nice
shows
guy
too, as other people
overall.
have told me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like Bill Cosby. The character was a brand. It wasn't really who he was as a person. He went out of
Yeah,
his way to
yeah.
conceal
It
who he
apparently was
was.
so. Exactly, and it always bothered me seeing him doing those pudding commercials
The
because I
Jello
know
pudding
pudding is
pops.
not good for kids. I
Yeah,
mean, there's no question about it.
none
You don't
whatsoever.
have to be a scientist. I mean, if you're going to put your money on anything, put it on. I'm not saying he's going to be out there selling broccoli, but was such a bad thing for kids to eat. Pudding is not a nutritious food, and it's not even a good snack food. I mean, people might think, "Oh, come on, it's just a dessert." But for Cosby to be making money off of that, I thought, it was sort of like Bing Crosby making money off of Chesterfield. Now cigarettes when he made a ton of money, him and Hope, off of
Oh yeah.
Chesterfields, but they didn't really know how bad it was. But it's like, I don't think, but he obviously chose them because Cosby to do Chesterfields because he was a singer, and they wanted a singer to say how smooth it is on your throat,
Hmm.
even though. I'm sure he didn't realize it was a cancer-causing thing, so he was a little bit more innocent. But Cosby was strictly using his brand to push pudding on kids when he could have. Maybe he figures, okay, I'm giving Fat Albert, and that's a good thing. Now I'm going to make some bucks too.
Right.
But he could have picked something other than pudding to push on kids, unless he was totally ignorant about nutrition. I mean, if you care about kids,
I mean,
you want them to
I,
start with good nutrition. If you're an adult, eat whatever you want. But to
I
start
mean,
little kids on
honestly,
pudding,
I just don't think he was the type to care. I don't think he really cared about
no, he
kids
didn't care. He was making a
whatsoever.
huge amount of money. You can
Whatsoever.
only imagine. He didn't do anything for cheap. I'm sure he made zillions of dollars off of that pudding, and didn't care that. He tells black kids to pull up their pants. Well, what about any kid not eating bad food for you? And
Yeah.
it was, and he may have felt it was an innocent food. Yeah, after all, pudding, you got
Well,
pudding,
that
you
and
want a pudding, you have ice cream, but
well,
there was
that and
nothing
like
in it that was any good.
even back then, a lot of the urban inner city areas where poverty, is rife in the African American communities, like those are nutrition deserts. Like even back then, there weren't
Yes.
supermarkets, there weren't grocery stores. Kids are
No.
going to the local corner store to get a lot of their food, and they're not getting
Yeah.
fresh, nutritious stuff. They're getting junk food.
No. So it'd be nice if he would have pushed something more nutritious, but it just always bothered me, and then it kind of sort of fit in with, like you say, he didn't really care. He was making money off of it, and that's the only reason why he was doing it. But look, I'm not perfect either. They say those who I'm not going to throw a stone, but I've been throwing a number of stones, haven't I, during this presentation of yours here.
Yeah.
So where do you live?
I'm
Where are you calling me
actually
from?
right outside of Chicago.
Uh
And
huh.
yeah, right outside of the very it was pretty snowy this weekend, so
Uh huh.
we're still a little bit
I was
chilly
in
over here.
Chicago once. That's where the Great Lakes are, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I was there a long time ago.
S-
So it was a fun city for me to go to. Someone here from Los Angeles who doesn't we don't have weather here. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, it's
gets a
just
little bit
always
chilly
nice.
occasionally.
So let me ask you, through all your experiences throughout your career, just to kind of finish up, if you had one message to give others on how to use writing or really any creative medium to bring out their inner voice, what would it be?
Well, now you can do it with the internet. When I was working on Laugh-In and Hollywood Squares and Three's Company, there were three networks basically, and it was tough to get any idea through anybody,
Hmm.
particularly on the selling a show level. But now you can do whatever you want thanks to the internet, and you can make a living from it without having to prostitute yourself. Like in many ways I did, quite frankly, when I wrote He-Man and had no idea what I was writing.
Right,
I
right.
mean, I was good at it, but now you can do whatever you want. You can do Card City. You can do some wonderful things. So you could be Randy Rainbow, who does some very funny stuff against a lefty against the right. You can make a career for yourself with the internet, and you have tools that you can do that now on your cell phone. The main thing is to stick to your guns
Yep.
and do what you want to do,
Yep.
and you don't have to please the network. And if you displeases Peggy Sharon, I think that was her name, fine. She can't stop you anymore. You can do whatever you want. She can't call up a Judy Price of the internet and get you off. Even there's a pretty terrible, mean things, bullying going on the internet, but there's also some wonderful room for creativity too. So don't get too concerned about what's going on in the news, the viruses. Try to keep your focus on your creative dreams, and you can do it now in a way that we never could. We did some wonderful things back in the day, but now you can uh, do anything on the internet
Yeah.
and creatively, and not have to get it through a gatekeeper anymore. So just do it, and also don't worry about the bullies. See, I think probably the big problem now is on Facebook. Anybody can you can put anything up there, and at the same time, anybody can saying this is the worst thing ever. But what a piece of shit! And they're just trolls that just love doing that. All
Yep.
they do all day is go on the internet and go after creative people and say shit about their work. Uh, uh, Pay no attention to that. If you just keep doing what you want to do and let the trolls do whatever they want, and they'll be gone, and you just stick to your guns. And I'm concerned about bullying because kids on the internet. Uh, they live so much on the internet, and if they're being bullied on the internet for something they're doing creatively, let's just get into that world. Let's
Yeah.
just say if you're a comedian on the internet, uh, you can really be blindsided by one comment, and a creative person is so has a very a gentle
Yeah, they're sensitive. Artists are always sensitive.
they're very sensitive, so they can overreact to one bastard who just has nothing better to do than to insult them, and so let it just forget about what people are saying. Just stick to your guns. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
And I think a big problem with the internet are the trolls who say anything awful about anybody.
And you know what the worst thing
Uh,
about the online bullying is that at least when I was a kid, if you were being bullied, you at least had the opportunity to stand your ground and fight back. You know,
yeah,
and
these
you
are people
can
coming out of the blue.
yeah,
You don't
and
even know
you
who they
really
are.
yeah they could be it could be a complete fake account, and some people just create fake accounts just to go on and troll. I mean, it really has to motivate you to just double down on your vision and what you want to express. You got to
But
use that as
the problem is the
motivation.
kids don't know that. They just
Yeah.
figure, oh, I'm no good. So you and I can talk about this, but people have not heard about us. And someone says, I think I'm going to, some little kid or whatever says, I think I'm going to try something, and they haven't heard us talk right now, and they try it, and then some jerk says, what a stupid asshole that person. Who do they think they are? Even if you're doing a review on Amazon, I
Right.
mean, everybody, whatever it is, people are trying to put you down. And to a creative person, it's a problem. So the other people that are being bullied, I feel bad for them. But for a creative person, if you're hearing this or whatever, uh, just keep at it and don't worry about these people that all they can do is bully. You know,
Now,
just
Now, the one thing that has kind of made your work so long lasting is the power of nostalgia.
hmm
Nostalgia is a powerful thing. I think a lot of people use it as a way to cope. As it's often a reciprocal for the happy memories they have from childhood. Now, since
hmm
people, think symbolically, we associate these memories with these characters, and kind of our interactions with them after school, things like that. So, just to go
hmm
ahead and finish up, how does it feel being a part of the millennial generation sees as the happiest part of their lives?
Well, which millennial? Are you talking about my generation or today's generation? I'm not sure which
I'm
is the
talking
millennial.
about my generation. So we'd be the kids. That would be pretty much what I think between 1980 and 96. I think is the
Oh
correct
yeah.
years.
Well, it's just that I never had any idea, that I was going to have any impact at all, other than getting the two secretaries to laugh at Filmation at my stuff. Um, it was never any thought of teaching any lesson, because when I would finish a Fat Albert or a He-Man, I had no idea what the moral was, and Arthur and I would sit down and say, well, what can we say the moral was here? And I said, I don't know. So we'd find some little thing, and we said, okay, because I had to write that final scene. That was always the last thing after I turned the script. So um, all I can say is, from the conventions I've been at, it's rather a warm feeling to know that someone could come home from school, and they were their He-Man was their friends. Fat Albert was their friend. The Ninja Turtles were their friends, and maybe they were friendlier in those days than they are now. Because again, the characters are edgier now, but
Yeah.
maybe the kids can relate to them too. But it was there would be no surprise. If He-Man liked you, you were liked. I remember there was a show on TV. This goes way back, called Boston Blackie, and it was a very low budget show, and it would start out. You see this guy walking down the street. He was a detective of some sort. He was walking down the street. It always started the same way. They would repeat the same thing every week, and they would say, "He's your." His phrase is, and it says, you can look it up.
Hmm.
An enemy to those who make him an enemy, friend to those who have no friend. That was Boston Bat Blackie. And apparently he goes way back to the pulp magazine days and a radio show. And there he was on TV. And I remember thinking as a kid, when he would say, a friend to those who have no friend, I thought he was my friend. When you're a kid, you don't know what's reality
Yeah.
and it was a T. If you look at Boston Blackie on YouTube, you'll see this scene, because it always opened up this way. He's walking down a dark street. There's a news guy selling magazines, and has a big old fashioned hat on, Boston Blackie, with a broad brim, and he's walking down the street. And they always said, an enemy to those who make him an enemy. Then he continues, friend to those who have no friend. And I was going from one school to another when I was growing up.
Hmm.
My father got different jobs, or for whatever reason, I was always like the new kid in school, and a friend was always an issue. Again, me having the friends. And so I thought, well, he was my friend. So he was my He-Man. It's kind of interesting how this conversation has evolved. When I was a kid, Boston Blackie, of all people, the phrase just uh, grabbed me, that he was my friend. I really thought
Yeah.
he was my friend, because it said so. The announcer said so. So it shows you how kids are so innocent and can be so affected by having a friend. In my case, it was Boston Blackie. Isn't that funny?
Yeah. And
And
I
then and then I write He-Man, where he was a friend to all these kids who were bullied and whatever, or had problems in
yeah.
school or with their parents,
Well, and
or
I
beat
think
up by
that
their father. or
I
whatever.
think that's the most important thing about nostalgia too, is that when we're kids, we often don't know how to process things that are occurring.
No, we have
And
no idea.
particularly if you're a lonely child, it's easy to internalize all of that and think that there's something wrong with you, and
Exactly.
and then it's hard to trust people, let people in. But I think being able to trust a fictional character like He-Man allows it to be, or
Hmm.
Boston Blackie for that extent, allows you to feel
Hmm.
safe and understood, and
Yeah, he
and you
was at that point. When I was watching that show, it was an old black and white. It's not even black and white; it's gray and white. The films are so old. He was my friend. I probably because I was always going from one school to another. I always had to make new friends, and I didn't. By the time I'd make a friend, I go, we move somewhere else or whatever. And there he was, my friend, and it grabbed me. It grabbed my attention. And I'm sure I came home. It was probably in reruns by the time I was watching it, to watch that show, just to see that opening where they said that. So if you YouTube Boston Blackie, the TV version, you may end up listening to a radio version with just pictures on the screen, but look at an old Boston Blackie TV show, and you'll see that opening scene, and there he's walking down the street, this alley, and a guy selling newspaper on the other side. Friend of those who have no friends. So there it is. So that's my He-Man Boston Blackie story.
and
Uh,
that is the perfect place to leave off, because the way you feel about Boston Blackie's the way I feel about He-Man and the Ninja Turtles, right?
isn't that interesting? Yeah, Ninja Turtles were certainly everybody's good friends. They
Yeah,
were, yeah. So there they were. The best cartoons were your friends, I guess. That's how we can look at it.
yeah.
While Warner Brothers had some great, edgy kind of stuff, and they were wonderful, especially for adults. It's maybe the softer Disney stuff, Mickey Mouse and Minnie. That's why they're still so popular.
Yeah, yeah.
Although I'm not a big fan of the Disney organization, generally speaking, because of what they
No.
did to the Writers Guild, the Cartoonists
Yeah,
Writers Guild.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Me
in any
either.
case, they were the ones that I think the kids liked the most, more than maybe, I guess you could like Bugs Bunny, but so there it is. I guess that's how we can wrap this off.
Yeah.
The friends that we grew up in cartoons that I wrote. Made a difference in a lot of kids' lives, that's for sure.
And that's the one thing that I definitely want to promote as well, is that if there's any writers watching this, or sorry, listening to this, and you're thinking that maybe your characters, in the moment you're writing them, might not make a difference in someone's lives 30 years down the line. Who knows with the internet who your media would be exposed to and who it will touch. So
Yes.
keep
So be
writing.
aware of that,
Yeah.
and be. I'm not saying be responsible, but be aware of it. And maybe you want to be the writer that's sort of um, the one that says, "Hey, don't believe authority. Watch out about all that." Or you just want to give them comfort. I mean, it's okay to do either way. It seems to
Yeah.
me, but just be aware it does make a difference. So, and it could make a difference in someone's life if that's what you want to do. But but then go and look at some old Max Sennett cartoon comedies with Buster, with like I looked at yesterday, a one with
Buster
Fatty
Keaton.
Arbuckle, hysterical stuff.
Before we hop off the line, let me ask you, where can people find more information, both about your writing, as well as the CBD business?
Well, it's actually Shopify. It's not CBD, although
Okay.
CBD is a big part of it. Shopify is a. So I was always a computer guy. So I segued into, of all things, people say, what? To e-commerce. And I've built all kinds of Shopify sites focusing on CBD, because I think that's a rather interesting world, particularly the merchants that are into CBD. So if you go to Rowby.com, it redirects to your CBD daddy. So there I am, helping people that are interested in CBD, particularly sell it
Hmm.
on the Shopify platform. So you can find me there, and I think I do have a form there. You can contact me via that form, even if you're not interested in selling CBD. And I'd love to hear from you to see about, if any of my cartoons, if you even know who I am, because there's so many riding them in those days, say hi to me, and that'd be just fine.
Awesome. Well, then you don't forget to reach out, folks. And, I'm just going to go on the record and say CBD oil has done wonders for my grandma. She was so against using it for so long because of just the marijuana stigma that's attached to it. But,
Exactly.
once she started using it for her pain, for, both her back and for her arthritis, I mean, man, it turned her perception of it right around.
Well, it is mine too. I never thought I would be pushing this stuff. I mean, I'm not pushing it. I'm pushing the platform that can
Yeah,
sell it.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
senior citizens are very much into CBD. They're one of the biggest market, and especially since they realize, everything they've been told about, even though it's nothing to do with marijuana, is now very questionable. That there's been all this misinformation about marijuana. CBD from hemp, of course, is not CBD from marijuana.
Right.
So anyway, thanks for contacting me, and I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, before we get out of here, just make sure to stop by his website, drop a line on the forum, tell him you said hi, and, let him know which one of the cartoons he wrote for was your friend growing up.
Yes.
And
Wonderful. Thanks for the call.
yes, sir. And we are out of here, folks. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.
Danger, excitement, adventure. Boston Blackie. Enemy of those who make him an enemy. Friend of those who have no friends. Yes, sir. That's Boston Blackie, and he's quite a guy.